It started with the sound of my own fire truck's sirens blaring down the street, but I wasn't in it. I was trapped in my own driveway, staring at a giant party tent, a row of glittery pink balloons, and a banner that read Karen's summer solstice soirée. And the worst part? She'd coned off my driveway like it was a carnival prize she won. I was in uniform, badge visible, and I had exactly 3 minutes to respond to a fire call 2 blocks over. But Karen, in her rhinestone flip-flops and a fanny pack that screamed authority complex, stood with her arms folded and said, "You'll love this. Maybe call an Uber like the rest of us civilians." That was the moment I knew. This party was going to end in citations, sirens, and maybe even a live audience. Saturday mornings in our neighborhood were usually quiet. The occasional barking dog, a jogger or two, maybe someone mowing their lawn. But today, I opened my door to what looked like a pop-up wedding reception happening on my own property line. I blinked a few times, wondering if I'd stumbled into a community-sponsored mirage. There was a massive white tent pitched partially across the road and entirely across my driveway. Rows of folding chairs, streamers flapping in the breeze, and about half a dozen people setting up sound equipment like we were about to host a summer music festival. I stepped onto the porch in uniform, helmet in one hand, travel mug in the other, staring at the absurdity in disbelief. My truck, my official Fire Marshal vehicle, was trapped, pinned in by a DJ booth, a catering van, and 2 big, orange cones with handwritten signs taped to them. One said, "Reserved for VIP," and the other just said, "Karen," in capital letters, as if the block itself was renamed in her honor. I walked down the steps, already dialing my assistant on speaker, letting him know I'd be delayed for the inspection over on Maple and 5th. Then I saw her. Karen, the reigning queen of our HOA board, was in full dictator mode. She was directing vendors with theatrical hand gestures, shouting about where the cake should go and how many feet apart the torches needed to be for ambience. She spotted me and waved like I was just another party guest. That should have been my first red flag. I walked up and gestured toward my truck. "Karen, I need to get out. I've got an inspection in 15 minutes. She looked at me like I'd interrupted her mid-Emmy acceptance speech. "Oh Liam, don't be dramatic. It's just for today. You can park down at the grocery store, it's only half a mile." My eyebrows shot up. "I'm not parking. I need to respond. You blocked an emergency vehicle." She rolled her eyes and actually snorted. "You and that Fire Marshal thing again. You do inspections, not hero work. Today is my solstice party. It's kind of important." That phrase hit like a truck. "Solstice party? You blocked my driveway for astrology?" She laughed. "It's for energy cleansing and moonlight wellness, but sure, let's call it astrology." At this point, I took a slow breath. I looked around. The fire pit was already lit in a corner of the tent, dangerously close to a pile of dry leaves. Several helium tanks were propped up against a hot grill. Decorative candles were perched on folding tables under a flammable vinyl canopy. My safety sensors were screaming in every direction. "Karen, you can't do this. There are multiple violations here. Open flame under a tent, obstructing a driveway, and you've got a van blocking shared access for emergency services." Karen, sipping something from a glittery goblet, shook her head with the sort of smugness only a self-appointed HOA queen could wear. "Oh Liam, stop pretending like you're the sheriff of the block. This isn't an emergency. It's a party. Don't ruin the vibe." I stared at her for a long beat. "Karen, I am the Fire Marshal for the entire district. Blocking an emergency access point isn't just a code violation, it's a crime." She chuckled again and muttered, "Sure it is," like she didn't believe a word I said. That's when a couple of neighbors began peeking out from their homes. Some waved. Others looked visibly uncomfortable. One of them, Mrs. Leonard from across the street, mouthed to me, "Please stop her." I nodded once. Noted. I took out my phone and began snapping pictures of every single violation in sight. Cables running through grass. Open flames. Combustible canopies. A literal stack of sparklers sitting beside the drink table like it was just a centerpiece. Karen noticed and tried to step in front of me. "You can't take photos. This is a private event." I replied without looking up, "You're spilling your private event across 3 properties and a public access lane. You lost the private claim 20 feet ago." She huffed and turned to her assistant. Yes, she had an assistant, telling her to call someone about me. "Tell them he's impersonating a city official." "Would you like me to show you the badge again, or should I just call dispatch?" I said dryly. She marched off in a fury, mumbling about harassment and small men with big clipboards. I ignored her. I walked around the tent again, photographing extension cords running into standing puddles, a food warmer wired with duct tape, and someone setting up fireworks near my neighbor's wooden fence. I sent a few shots to our city code enforcement officer and kept walking. Then, my radio chirped. There was a kitchen fire on Cedar and 10th. I was supposed to respond with the nearest engine crew to oversee the response. I turned, walked back to my truck, and couldn't move. The catering van had now double-parked behind the DJ booth. My truck was blocked in on all sides. I ran toward the van driver. "Hey, I need to leave. Move your vehicle now." He looked at me, shrugged, and said, "Talk to the lady in charge." That's when I felt something inside me snap. The kind of slow burn that leads to wildfires. I stepped back, grabbed my radio, and called dispatch. "This is Fire Marshal Liam Carter. I'm reporting obstruction of an emergency response vehicle at 451 Oak Ridge Court. Party tents, double-parked vehicles, no egress. I need patrol to assist immediately." Karen saw me on the radio and practically flew across the lawn. "What are you doing? You're going to ruin everything." I looked at her squarely. "Karen, you just escalated this from a code violation to an active obstruction. That's a misdemeanor. Hope your party planning insurance covers criminal defense." She screamed, "He's impersonating an officer. Someone call the police." Right on cue, the sirens echoed in the distance. But they weren't for the house fire on Cedar. They were coming for this circus. As 2 squad cars rounded the corner and neighbors began stepping outside with phones recording, I couldn't help but think. This solstice party was about to be Karen's public eclipse. The moment the first patrol car pulled up to the curb, Karen's smug expression twisted into something halfway between panic and disbelief. She rushed toward the officers in a full sprint, her oversized sun hat flapping behind her like a cape. She didn't even let them step out of the car before she launched into her breathless monologue, waving her arms like she was directing air traffic. "Officer! Officer! He's impersonating a fire marshal. He's harassing my guests. He threatened me." She pointed dramatically at me as if expecting the police to immediately tackle me to the ground and throw me in cuffs. What she hadn't anticipated was that the officer stepping out of the vehicle was Deputy Cole, a man I'd worked alongside for nearly a decade. As soon as he saw me, he grinned and nodded like we were meeting for lunch. "Hey, Cap. I thought you were on drill duty today." I shrugged. I was. Got grounded by a party tent and a pile of code violations. Karen's jaw hung slack. She looked from me to Cole and back like she'd just walked into the wrong courtroom. Her voice cracked as she asked, "Wait, you know him?" Cole raised an eyebrow and gestured toward my uniform. "Karen, this is Fire Marshal Liam Carter. He's the district authority on fire safety and emergency access. If he says your setup is a hazard, you better listen." Karen tried to recover, placing a hand dramatically on her chest. "But he's exaggerating. This is just a community party. I cleared it with the HOA board." Cole gave her a tight-lipped smile. "That may be, but blocking an emergency vehicle's access and having open flame under an unpermitted tent? That's serious. You're lucky he didn't shut this down an hour ago." Karen's lips pursed into a line so thin it could cut glass. She turned toward me, venom barely masked behind her voice. "You could have just talked to me calmly instead of calling in the cavalry." I kept my voice level. "Karen, I did talk to you. You called my badge made up and told me to Uber. Then you doubled down and added more violations after I warned you. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Deputy Cole and his partner began walking the perimeter of the party, noting the catering van still blocking the driveway, the proximity of open flame to flammable material, and the fire pits nestled dangerously close to hanging fabric. A few guests had started to murmur, pulling out their phones and snapping pictures as they realized things were not going according to Karen's plan. Some looked amused, others embarrassed, but one thing was certain: the vibe was shifting. I moved away from the spectacle and began logging detailed notes in my field report app. Every cord, every flame, every bottle of lighter fluid left in the sun was documented. I wasn't just planning to issue a warning. I was building a report that would go beyond the HOA and into the city's code enforcement system. Karen wasn't just hosting a tacky party, she was endangering lives and pretending it was a neighborhood picnic. Meanwhile, Karen huddled with a few of her cronies, people I recognized from past HOA meetings who always nodded when she spoke and never read a single bylaw. They kept glancing at me like I'd just canceled Christmas. One of them, a man in a linen suit who I only knew as Ted, approached me with a patronizing smile. "Liam, surely we can work something out. Maybe just let the party continue and we'll make sure Karen doesn't host anything without permits next time." I looked at him and responded, "This isn't a bake sale violation, Ted. Blocking emergency access is a criminal offense. And right now that van is still obstructing a fire lane. This isn't up for negotiation." At that moment the situation escalated. A spark, possibly from one of the outdoor candles, landed on a decorative paper banner near the tent entrance. The edges caught, and within seconds, a small flame licked upward toward the canopy. One of the guests screamed, and a few ran over with their drinks, attempting to douse it with lemonade and beer. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the back of my truck, ran through the crowd, and smothered the flame before it could spread. The entire ordeal lasted maybe 20 seconds, but it was enough. The guests backed away, now clearly uncomfortable. The smell of burnt plastic and smoke hung in the air like a warning sign from the universe itself. Karen came rushing over, shrieking, "Who set that? Who let that happen?" She looked around, searching for someone to blame. When her eyes landed on me, I saw something shift in her demeanor. No more smugness, just raw fear. I addressed the crowd, raising my voice so they could all hear. "This is why we have regulations. This is why permits matter. This tent was never safe. You were all lucky this didn't end a lot worse." A few guests nodded. One woman whispered to her husband and began gathering her things. People started trickling away, their fun completely extinguished. Karen stood in the middle of her now half-empty party, fists clenched at her sides. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. You ruined this neighborhood tradition." I replied, "No, Karen. You did. I just made sure no one got hurt in the process." Deputy Cole stepped forward again. "Ma'am, I'm going to need the catering van moved immediately. And you'll be receiving a citation from the city regarding today's violations. Further infractions could result in misdemeanor charges." Karen looked like she wanted to scream but had run out of voice. Her assistant was already gone. The DJ had disconnected his equipment. The helium tank guy was wheeling his tanks away without a word. It was a full-blown retreat, and she stood there alone like the last villain at the end of a disaster movie. I went home for a few minutes to change clothes and review my field notes, but the silence in the house was short-lived. My phone rang. It was Ben from City Code Enforcement. He'd received the photos and preliminary report I sent earlier and said they'd be conducting a formal safety audit on the HOA's public spaces starting next week. He also mentioned he'd flagged Karen's name in their system because it wasn't the first complaint linked to her event. I told him I'd be happy to assist. This wasn't just about one party. It was about a pattern of reckless entitlement that had gone unchecked for too long. Later that evening, I took a walk down the block. The tent was gone. So were the chairs, the banners, and the guests. Only a few scorch marks on the pavement and a melted paper plate near the sidewalk hinted at the chaos earlier that day. I passed by Mrs. Leonard's house, and she stepped out on her porch. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We've all been scared to say anything, but today, you showed us we don't have to just take it." I nodded. "You shouldn't have to." As I walked back toward my driveway, I noticed something taped to my mailbox. A printed flyer with Karen's face on it, photoshopped to look like a superhero. HOA President Karen, Defender of Community Freedom. It was clearly meant as a joke, probably by one of the teenagers on the street. But at the bottom, in big red marker, someone had written, "Fired by the Fire Marshal?" I couldn't help but smile. Karen might have tried to throw a party, but instead, she lit the fuse on her own downfall. And I had a front row seat. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to a strange silence. The kind that follows a storm but still carries the tension in the air like something else was brewing. Karen's infamous solstice party had ended in disaster, and now the block was buzzing, not with music or decorations, but with murmurs, texts, whispers between hedges, and front porch conversations that abruptly stopped whenever someone else walked by. It felt like the entire street was holding its breath, waiting for the next explosion. What they didn't know was that the fuse had already been lit. I was back at the station by 7. As soon as I walked in, my phone lit up with a forwarded email from our city's fire safety inbox. Subject line: Hostile neighbor incident, urgent review needed. The body of the message was a hastily written paragraph claiming I had harassed a community event, fabricated fire violations, and blocked access to Karen's guests. It even accused me of tampering with her decorations. The sender was listed as anonymous, but the email address was visible right at the top: karenhoaofficial@email.com. She didn't even bother to make a burner. I chuckled as I opened the message. She really thought she could outplay the system by reporting me to the very office I supervised. What she didn't realize was that her complaint would trigger an automatic response that routed it directly to me. I read it twice, then forwarded it to the City Safety Commissioner with my full field report, including timestamps, geotagged photos, and witness note. Her email wasn't just petty, it was damning. She'd claimed I interfered with lawful HOA operations, which proved she saw her backyard fire hazard circus as some sort of authorized agency. That alone would amuse the city audit team. Later that day, I decided to set up a small drill with my station crew at the neighborhood's community center. It was scheduled weeks ago, but the timing now couldn't have been better. Our goal was to run a simple hydrant flow test and hose pressure trial across Oak Ridge Court, the very street Karen had blocked the day before. We coordinated with city officials, filed all the correct permits, and let the HOA know 24 hours in advance. Karen, however, was completely unaware, probably too busy damage controlling her party gone wrong. By the time we arrived with 2 engines and a water tender, the cul-de-sac was already watching. Lawn chairs appeared. Kids peeked from windows. Someone set up a lemonade stand with a sign that said, "Support the real heroes." My guys started running hoses from the hydrants, unspooling thick coils across the street, including right in front of Karen's house where her SUV was still parked. She came out the front door, jaw dropped, robe flapping, mascara smudged like she hadn't slept. She ran across her lawn in house slippers. "You can't be here. This is harassment." I stayed calm. "Karen, this is a scheduled safety drill. Fully permitted. Public record." She pointed at the hose draped over her vehicle. "You're damaging my car." I turned to my crew. "Increase flow to test pressure stability." A hiss of water surged through the hose, lifting it slightly and thumping it against the side of her SUV. Karen screamed and lunged at the hose, grabbing it like she could stop 1,000 gallons per minute with her bare hands. As soon as she twisted the coupling, the pressure backfired. A geyser of water shot up and drenched her from head to toe. Her scream turned into a gurgling gasp as she stumbled back into her yard, soaked, her robe clinging to her like seaweed on a rock. The entire street watched in stunned silence. Then came the laughter. It started with one neighbor, then another, until it spread like wildfire. Karen stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard a wind chime fell off its hook. I turned to my team and said, "All right, now let's test the hydrant near the clubhouse." As we packed up later that afternoon, Deputy Cole showed up again. He pulled me aside with a small smirk. "You'll want to hear this. The HOA just filed a motion to hold an emergency meeting to censure you." I blinked. "Censure me? For what?" "Performing my job." Cole shrugged. "They're claiming you're using your position to intimidate the community." I burst out laughing. So the woman who hosted an illegal party, ignored every fire code in the book, and blocked emergency vehicles is now claiming she's the victim? He nodded. "That's not even the best part. I just got a call from State Fire. They're conducting an external audit on HOA-sanctioned events in our area. Apparently, Karen's party triggered a chain reaction of complaints from other neighborhood. Turns out, this isn't her first backyard festival. That changed everything." I thanked Cole and immediately called State Fire myself. Their lead inspector, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sierra, confirmed that multiple HOA violations had been flagged statewide and that Karen's name came up several times in event permit dispute. "Your report nailed her," Sierra said. "She's on our radar now." That evening, I emailed the entire HOA board a copy of my report, not just about the party, but also the improperly stored fireworks I'd seen behind Karen's garage. Alongside it, I attached city code references, fire ordinance links, and a highlight reel video my team had spliced together from the hydrant test. It showed the water geyser scene in glorious 4K. I didn't caption it, but the message was clear. Play stupid games, win high-pressure prizes. To no one's surprise, the HOA board meeting the following day was chaos. I attended via Zoom, just to observe. Karen, clearly shaken but still trying to assert control, opened the session by accusing me of personally targeting women in leadership. That made half the room wince. Another member, Ms. Patel, interrupted with a question that cut through the noise like a razor. "Karen, did you or did you not approve the use of open flame under an unpermitted tent?" Karen stammered. I delegated safety matters to my assistant, who was trained in birthday setups. The board fell silent. Someone muted their mic to laugh. Another member cleared their throat and asked if Karen had received fire department sign-off before her event. She admitted she hadn't. That was the last straw. One of the members, previously neutral, motioned to censure Karen herself. It was seconded almost instantly. A vote followed. 5 in favor, 1 abstained. Karen sat there blinking, then slowly removed her headset and ended the call without a word. The next day, something remarkable happened. My mailbox was full. But not with complaints, cards, note, even a pie. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years stopped by to say thank you. A kid handed me a crayon drawing of me with a fire hose battling a giant dragon labeled Karenzilla. I taped it to my fridge. But the best part came in the form of an email. Subject line: State Inspection Scheduling. The audit team was officially launching an investigation into HOA event policies, and they wanted me to assist. The first location? Oak Ridge Court. My neighborhood. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and thought about Karen trying to explain away illegal fire pits, unlicensed parties, and melted plastic banners to a state inspector who wouldn't be so forgiving. The party might have ended, but the firestorm she started was just heating up. By the time the state fire inspection was officially scheduled for Oak Ridge Court, word had already spread like wildfire. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was now a neighborhood punchline. People who had once tiptoed around her were openly discussing her antics in front yards and grocery store checkout lines. The woman who used to strut around with a clipboard now barely peeked out from behind her curtains. But she wasn't going down quietly. That much became clear when a thick envelope landed in my mailbox stamped with legal markings. Karen had filed a civil suit against me personally. The charges were laughable on paper. She accused me of intentional defamation, emotional distress, and violating her civil liberties by conducting what she called a vengeance-driven campaign of neighborhood humiliation. The supporting documents were just as absurd. Photos of her robe soaked during the fire hose incident, a screenshot of the leaked party video, and a copy of the crayon drawing labeled Karenzilla she somehow believed I had orchestrated. I sat at my dining table, shaking my head, wondering how far she was willing to push her narrative of victimhood. But what Karen didn't realize was that she'd just kicked a hornet's nest wearing a meat suit. The city's legal department took one look at her complaint and sent back a response so blunt I almost felt bad for her. Almost. It said I had acted within my authority at every stage, that her accusations lacked legal grounding, and that my documentation of safety violations was protected by both policy and public interest. They included over a dozen supporting references, a timeline of events, and photos submitted not by me, but by neighbors who had grown tired of her abuse of power. Her suit was dismissed before it could even be assigned a court date. But the legal drama didn't stop there. Karen's complaint had triggered something unexpected. The city clerk, during their review, discovered that Karen had filed more than a dozen unauthorized HOA event permits over the last 3 years, some forged, others missing necessary signatures, and several linked to misappropriated community funds. Suddenly, her solstice party wasn't just a fire hazard, it was evidence. The city council launched a full internal review into HOA financial activity, and Karen's name appeared more than any other board members. One morning I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Diane, a former HOA treasurer who had quietly resigned 6 months ago. She told me she had documentation that Karen had pressured her to sign off on event budgets without itemized expense breakdowns. She emailed me copies of check stubs, vendor quotes, and even a few voice memos Karen had left when she was in a rush. In one, Karen could be heard saying, "Just sign it, Diane. No one ever checks this stuff unless they're looking for a reason to dig." It was the smoking gun the audit team didn't even expect. Meanwhile, the City Safety Board scheduled an emergency hearing. Karen was summoned, along with other HOA members, to appear before the council and answer for her mismanagement. I was invited too, not as a defendant but as a witness. When I arrived, the room was packed. Local reporters stood near the back. Neighbors filled the rows of chairs. Karen walked in late, wearing dark sunglasses and a silk scarf like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. She barely glanced at me. The hearing began with a reading of the violations found at her party, followed by evidence from other events she'd hosted. Photos, documents, and first-hand testimony from residents painted a clear picture of a woman who had been playing by her own rules for years. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I reviewed the timeline, presented my fire safety documentation, and recounted what happened on the day of the party. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. Then Karen took the stand. She spoke in circles. Blamed her assistant, blamed vendors, claimed she'd been targeted for being a strong woman in a leadership role. At one point, she accused the city inspector of having a personal vendetta because she rejected his HOA dues increase proposal, an accusation that earned more than a few audible groans from the audience. When pressed on the misappropriated funds, she claimed she couldn't recall specific details and insisted that her records had been misplaced during a recent filing system overhaul. No one believed her. The board thanked her for her time, then informed her they'd be issuing an interim suspension pending further investigation. She was ordered to cease all HOA activity immediately. That should have been enough, but karma wasn't done yet. The very next week was the community's first ever neighborhood evacuation drill, organized in full cooperation with the fire department, the city, and the newly cautious HOA. Guess whose house was selected as a checkpoint for evacuation volunteers? Karen's. When she received the notification, she tried to block it, submitting a petition to City Hall claiming the location choice was deliberately hostile. The city rejected her request. Not only was her house geographically ideal, but the selection process had been randomized by software. She would now be the official checkpoint for a team of firefighters, volunteers, and a few news cameras. On the day of the drill, Karen did her best to fake cooperation. She put on a bright blouse and stood in her driveway pretending to smile as my team parked across her lawn and set up temporary triage and communication equipment. But her face twitched every time a truck rolled over her freshly planted flower beds. A group of teens volunteered to hand out water bottles and protein bars near her walkway, and one of them accidentally knocked over a lawn gnome that looked suspiciously like her. It cracked in two. She glared, but said nothing. The drill went smoothly, with every resident accounted for in record time. Neighbors chatted and mingled. A few even thanked me personally, saying they hadn't felt this sense of community in years. Karen stood at the edge of her property like a statue, silently watching the very neighborhood she once ruled interact like she didn't exist. It was poetic. The queen had been dethroned, and no one wanted her back on the throne. A few days later, the final nail in her HOA coffin came during the monthly board vote. The agenda was clear: removal of Karen from all remaining positions of influence. It wasn't just about the party anymore. It was about years of bullying, favoritism, and manipulation. The vote was anonymous, but the result wasn't. 92% voted in favor of removing her. 2 abstained. Karen didn't even show up to the meeting. I returned home that evening to find a notice posted on the community board. It was official. Karen was no longer a member of the HOA board. A new election would be held, and until then, decisions would be overseen by a temporary panel led by residents, including a retired fire chief, a nurse, and a teacher. Real people. Decent people. For the first time in years, Oakridge Court was being run by folks who actually cared about safety and fairness instead of who had the flashiest yard decor. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee as the sunset painted the sky in gold and lavender. My driveway was clear. My neighborhood was quiet again, not in fear or tension, but in peace. Kids rode their bikes. Dogs barked. Sprinklers hummed softly in the distance. It felt like the block had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. Just before heading inside, I noticed something near my mailbox again. A small, laminated flyer with a cartoon illustration of a flame wearing sunglasses and a caption that read, "The real fire starter of Oakridge Court." I laughed. Whoever made it had a sense of humor. And unlike Karen, they knew when the fire needed to burn, and when it was time to let the ashes settle. The morning after Karen's removal, the entire neighborhood seemed brighter, not just from the sunlight but from the relief that hung in the air like a fresh breeze. People were out earlier, smiling more freely, chatting on sidewalks without constantly glancing over their shoulders. For the first time in what felt like years, Oakridge Court felt like a neighborhood again. The reign of passive-aggressive HOA notices and weaponized bylaws was over. Still, there was an unspoken curiosity floating around. What now? What would happen to Karen? And would she try to make one last move? I didn't have to wait long to find out. By the end of that week, the video footage from the state fire inspector's visit and the HOA hearing leaked online. It wasn't me or any official who posted it. Someone, probably a neighbor with a tech-savvy kid, had compiled clips from Karen's party disaster, the fire hose incident, the sprinkler gnome decapitation during the drill, and even her failed Zoom defense at the hearing. The video was set to dramatic music and titled Queen of the Block, Karen's Final Blaze. It hit over 100,000 views in just 2 days. The comments were merciless and hilarious. People were quoting her now infamous line about being more important than fire trucks and turning it into memes. The one where someone photoshopped her face onto a stop sign with the caption, "Karen blocks everything," had me and the entire station crew laughing so hard we nearly spilled coffee on the dispatch board. It would have been easy to gloat, but I didn't need to. The truth had done the heavy lifting. Karen, for all her drama and pride, had undone herself. Her public persona was in shambles, her community influence gone, and her reputation being torn apart not by vengeance, but by her own recorded words and actions. She attempted a brief pushback online, claiming harassment and edited footage, but it didn't land. Too many people had lived through her behavior firsthand. The internet, usually quick to forget, was in no mood to forgive this time. Soon after, Karen's small home organizing business started losing clients. Apparently, a few local business owners were less than thrilled to discover she had been the person who made their employees move their cars mid-lunch to comply with her fabricated, quiet hours during previous parties. By the end of the month, her website was down, and her social media pages were either scrubbed or locked. She wasn't just stepping back. She was disappearing. Meanwhile, Oakridge Court was transforming. With Karen gone, the temporary HOA panel moved quickly to repair the damage she'd caused. They reversed several arbitrary fines she had pushed onto residents, reopened community access points she'd blocked with unauthorized beautification projects, and hosted a weekend town hall where everyone was allowed to speak without fear of being silenced or threatened with fake citations. The turnout was incredible. We didn't meet in a stuffy office. We met in the park, under string lights, with folding chairs, lemonade stands, and even a fire safety booth I set up with my team. People laughed, asked questions, and brainstormed actual ways to improve the community. For once, the rules were being made by the people, not by one person's fragile ego. That night, after the meeting wrapped up, one of the kids who had drawn the Karenzilla poster earlier came up to me with another piece of artwork. This time it was me in a fire suit, holding a hose like a sword, standing between two houses and spraying out the words "safety first." His mom smiled and said they'd never felt safer. I took the drawing, thanked him, and added it to the growing collection taped up in my office. I wasn't a hero. I just refused to let a bully play queen while everyone else bowed their heads. But just when it felt like the dust had settled completely, Karen tried one last stunt. It was a Sunday morning, and I was raking leaves when a neighbor came jogging up the sidewalk, panting and holding his phone. He told me that Karen had been spotted trying to attend a real estate open house in the neighborhood across town, posing as a potential buyer. According to the realtor, she was asking detailed questions about their HOA structure, board composition, and enforcement power. She was already planning her next throne. The thought was both hilarious and concerning. I called a friend at the realtor's agency and asked if she'd mentioned her name. She hadn't. She'd introduced herself as Catherine Bellevue, a name so obviously fake it sounded like a soap opera villain. But it was clear. Karen hadn't learned anything. She wasn't interested in accountability. She was just looking for her next sandbox to control. I decided not to pursue it. There was no legal reason to stop her from moving. But I did send a friendly heads-up to their HOA president, a retired colonel named Harris, with a copy of my report and a simple note. If you see this name pop up, check the internet first. He replied with a thumbs up and a quote, "Let her try." In the meantime, back at Oakridge, the community officially elected a new HOA board. The results were unanimous. Mrs. Delgado, the retired nurse who had calmly stepped up during the chaos, was now president. Her first order of business was transparency. The second was a safety committee. She asked me to join, not as an enforcer, but as an advisor. I accepted without hesitation. Together, we implemented regular CPR training, monthly fire safety checks for the elderly residents, and even a community response plan for wildfires, all funded by the same dues that had once been spent on flower-shaped traffic cones and glitter-covered flyers. The funniest twist of all came a few weeks later when a small package arrived at my door. It was from the State Fire Authority. Inside was a framed plaque that read, "In recognition of Fire Marshal Liam Carter, for extinguishing more than just flames and ensuring that fire safety reaches beyond buildings into communities." Underneath, someone had scribbled in pen, also for soaking Karen. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. I hung it on my front door for a week. Not out of pride, but as a quiet reminder that one voice, when backed by truth and purpose, can put out a blaze of nonsense. And that some people may never change, but that doesn't mean the rest of us have to live in their smoke. One evening, long after things had calmed down, I sat outside again, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. A few kids rode by on scooters. A couple walked their dog, waving as they passed. The sound of someone playing guitar drifted in from 2 houses down. And for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for another complaint or confrontation. I was just home. Peace doesn't always come from silence. Sometimes it comes after the storm, when the air is clean, and people can breathe freely again. Karen had tried to turn the neighborhood into her empire, but in the end, she gave everyone something far more valuable than power or control. She reminded us what we never wanted to become. And in doing so, she helped us finally become a community. And just like that, the fire was out. But the lesson and the laughter would burn bright for a long time.